January 20-7th, 1940-5 Tokyo airspace 20-8,000 feet. Up here the air is thin as gauze and the temperature plummets to 50 degrees below zero. If you were to take off your glove and touch the aluminum skin of the fuselage, your skin would instantly tear away due to the extreme freezing cold metal surface. But inside the rear blister of the B-29 Superfortress, known as A250- to 20- to -ear- old staff's Sergeant Robert Chen did not feel the cold at all. What he felt was a vibration of pure terror that drilled straight into his bones. Through the thick, bulletproof glass, he was not looking at the cloud layers or Mount Fuji. He was staring at a black propeller expanding wildly in his vision. It belonged to a Japanese Army Ki-40-4 Tojo fighter screaming toward their right wing at 400 miles per hour. There was no evasion maneuver and there was no strafing fire. The Japanese pilot had only one objective, which was to turn himself and his aircraft into a human missile. Seconds later, a sound of tearing metal, sickening and loud, drowned out the roar of the four Wright cyclone engines. This was not a special effect from a Hollywood movie. This was the cruelest mathematics of the Pacific War, trading a cheap fighter plane for a $600,000 strategic bomber carrying 11 highly trained American lives. When this B-29 finally ended its battle, that day it would claim a miracle deemed impossible, which was 14 confirmed enemy kills in a single sortie. But before that statistic could be written into history, they had to survive the next few minutes of hell. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we are not reciting cold statistics from a textbook. We are uncovering a buried legend, the story of a Superfortress called A250-2. We will tell the story of the young Chinese-American gunner who fought off an entire Japanese interceptor squadron alone in one of the most insane aerial brawls in human history. To understand how this happened, we have to turn the clock back to that fateful morning. 11:40-2 in the morning, January 20-7th, 1940-5. For the 70-3rd Bombardment Wing stationed in the Marianas, this was supposed to be routine. Their target was the military-industrial heart of Tokyo. Robert Chen, a young sergeant from the 490-7th Bombardment Group, was crouched in the B-29 famous Central Fire Control Station. He was young, only 20-2, but this was already his 11th mission over the Japanese main islands. In his previous 10 missions, he had never confirmed a single kill. But fate, it seemed, had decided to cash in all his luck, good and bad, on this single day. You have to understand the B-29 Superfortress was the most advanced weapon platform of its time. It was not just a plane, it was a flying computer lab. Unlike the B-17 gunners in Europe who froze in open windows manhandling heavy machine guns, Robert Chen operated a revolutionary central fire control system. In his hands he held precise control grips wired electronically for remote-controlled turrets across the fuselage. Each turret housed twin 50-caliber Browning machine guns, and it was a lethal combination. Chen did not need to physically muscle the guns. He simply tracked the light pip in his optical sight. The onboard analog computer automatically corrected for wind speed, gravity, bullet drop, and calculated the lead angle based on the bomber's speed and the enemy relative motion. It was like a video game decades before video games existed, but in 1940-5 this was genuine black technology. Yet no amount of technology could completely cancel out fear because the enemy had changed. If this were November 1940-, for when the B-29s first started hammering Japan, the enemy pilots would have tried to shoot them down in traditional dogfights. But by January 1940-5, the situation had shifted drastically as the desperation of the kamikaze tactics primarily used against Navy ships had infected the Army Air Force. The interceptor units began adopting a tactic known as suicide ramming. This was not official doctrine yet, but it was a calculation born of despair, one fighter for one bomber. To the Japanese command, that was a bargain. Just 2 weeks prior, on January 14th, over Nagoya, the 5 priceless B-29s had been knocked out. Robert Chen and his crew knew this in the briefing that morning. The intelligence officer prediction was grim. 60 to B-29s were scheduled to fly. Intelligence estimated that at least 9 would not return. That was not just a probability. It was a death sentence as A-square 50 to climb to 20 8,000 feet, crossing the Japanese coastline. The radar screens lit up. Radar operators on Honshu had locked onto the intruders long ago. Air raid sirens wailed across Tokyo. And at high noon, the first Japanese fighters appeared. It was not 1 or 2. It was as if a hornet nest had been kicked. 40-3 Japanese interceptors burst through the cloud layers, swarming like sharks that had smelled blood in the water, heading straight for the formation. Robert Chen first test came from 12,000 yards out. Through his optical sight, he watched a black speck grow rapidly into a sharp silhouette for key 40- for Tojo. The code name itself carried a mix of irony and dread. This fighter was designed specifically to intercept bombers boasting an incredible climb, rate and heavy firepower. The Tojo shot upward through the clouds almost vertically like a rocket. Its movement was sharp, decisive, clearly intending to strike the formation leader from the blind spot beneath the belly. But Robert Chen did not give him the chance. His hands, worst eddy on the consoleless ediness born of endless repetition. Through the remote system, he took control of the upper forward turret and the lower belly turret simultaneously. As the Tojo performed a split S maneuver at 27,000 feet, preparing to dive on the lead plane, Chen pressed the firing button. For 50 caliber machine guns roared in unison. Tracers wove a web of death in the thin air. This was not spray and pray, this was a calculated snipe. The computer instantly adjusted for the thin air, the 400 mph closing speed in the lid. Although Chen was physically 15 feet away from the guns, the remote design allowed him to execute the kill with surgical precision. 800 yards, fire a stream of 50 caliber rounds traveling at 2,800 feet per second slammed into the Japanese fighter. The fragile airframe of the Ki 40- was instantly turned into a sieve. Chen clearly saw black smoke burst from the engine cowling. The fighter rolled uncontrollably to the left and vanished like a dead leaf beneath the formation. No explosion, no fireball. Just a silence where a threat used to be. The plane fell so fast, no one could confirm the crash. But that was just the appetizer. Minutes later, the real storm arrived. By 12:07 in the afternoon, the entire formation was engulfed in a chaotic melee. The sky over Tokyo had become a coliseum. The Japanese tactic was clear. They knew the B-29 defensive fire was too dense for single attacks, so they employed wolf-pack tactics. The standard move was a high-side dive from the 11 o'clock positions, lashing through the bomber stream at 400 mph. The closing speed was so high that gunners usually had a time window of only a fraction of a second. But today the pilots were relentless. 2 o'clock high, the aircraft commander voice exploded over the intercom. Robert Chen swung the upper turret hard. Another Ki 40- was adjusting its attitude, lining up for a beam attack. Range 700 yards. The enemy nose was pointed dead at A-square 50-2 as if pulled by an invisible string. Chen squeezed the trigger again. This time a 3-second-long burst armor, piercing incendiary rounds tore through the enemy skin. Rounds tore through without resistance, drilling straight into the engine. A muffled explosion followed and black smoke instantly swallowed the cockpit. The fighter flipped over, trailing a long tongue of flame as it plummeted. Kill confirmed. But Chen had no time to celebrate. As that plane fell, Timur had already taken up attack positions. It was a suffocating, rotating assault. The right waist gunner was screaming, his twin guns hammering away at a fighter closing low. Simultaneously utilizing the central system override authority, Chen took control of the lower rear turret. He stared into the sight like a hunter. The enemy fired but missed. Chen did not. He anticipated the enemy flight path and stitched a line of bullets into the wing root of the Ki 40-4. This altitude, the extreme cold made metal brittle as glass. The wings snapped off like torn paper. The entire aircraft disintegrated instantly, turning into a cloud of glittering aluminum confetti. That was A-50- to second confirmed kill of the day. If you think that was the climax, you are wrong. The clock ticked to 12:19 in the afternoon. The formation reached the initial point, or IP. This is the most vulnerable moment of a bombing run. To ensure accuracy, the bombers must fly straight and level for 6 agonizing minutes. For the bombardier, these are 6 minutes of science. For the rest of the crew, it is 6 minutes of being a sitting duck. Right then, 14 key 40- for fighters appeared 3,000 feet above the bomber stream. They did not dive immediately. They circled like vultures once, twice. They were waiting for the perfect angle, setting up a coordinated death blow. At 12:21 in the afternoon, they moved. Chen counted them in his sight, 1 to 3, for they paired up, diving simultaneously from 10 o'clock and to o'clock high. It was a textbook pincer attack designed to split the defensive fire. No single gunner could track to directions at once. The first pair opened fire at 1,000 yards. Chen locked onto the leader. His tracers merged with fire from 2 other B-29s, creating an impenetrable wall of metal. The lead key 40- for flew straight into this torrent. The canopy shattered, and the plane rolled violently to the right, smashing into its own wingman. 2 planes turned into a single fireball, disintegrating in mid-air. Kills number 3 and 4. But the second pair used the chaos as cover. To key 40-4s rushed to within 500 yards of A-50- to their cannons were spitting fire. Chen could see the muzzle flashes. He whipped his sight around, but this Japanese plane had no intention of breaking off. It did not pull up, it did not turn, it just kept coming. The pilot had committed to the ram. For seconds left, Chen was still firing. The upper forward turret poured rounds into the key 40- for engine cowling. Sparks flew, but the plane kept coming like a zombie, dead, but moving 300 yards, 200 yards, 100 yards. Although trailing thick smoke, the inertia was lethal. At the last moment, its number 3 engine slammed into A-50-2. Specifically, it was a sound like a train collision occurring at 12:20-2 in the afternoon. The key 40- for hit the B-29 number 3 engine like a steel meteor. The impact drove the spinning propeller like a giant chainsaw into the B-29 engine casing. A shriek of tearing metal vibrated through the entire fuselage, followed by a violent shudder. The Japanese fighter, thrown by the massive reaction force, rolled right, its 3-bladed propeller sheared off and flying into the void like shrapnel. The fuselage tumbled over the B-29 back and disappeared. Aluminum and steel rained over the bomber. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed like a disco. Number 3 engine on fire, number 4 engine losing oil pressure. The aircraft commander acted instantly, cutting fuel to the right side engines and firing the extinguishers. The massive B-29 instantly lost 50% of its power, but the ramming had done more than kill the engines. A-50- began to fall behind. Its speed dropped from 300 miles per hour altitude, bleeding away at 300 feet per minute. In an air war, straggling means death. Once you leave the protective cover of the formation, overlapping fire, a damaged B-29 is just meat on the table. The Japanese wolf packs, or at 3 key 40- fours, immediately broke off their original attack, run and turned toward the falling giant. The situation was desperate. Right-wing damage to engines out, severe vibration. Standard procedure for a bomber this damaged and losing power was to jettison the bombs and bail out. Fighting a dogfight in a crippled heavy bomber was suicide, but Robert Chen did not give up. He swung the upper turret to meet the first rusher. High dive 1 o'clock, 1,000 yards. Chen took a breath, forcing himself to ignore the screaming alarms and the shaking floor. He waited for the computer to solve the geometry. 800 yards. He pressed the button. But the computer needed 3 seconds to calculate the curve. Those 3 seconds felt like a century. 600 yards. He held the trigger down. Finally, the stream of death connected. The 50 caliber rounds punched through the nose, detonating the fuel tank. The canopy blew out and the fighter rolled left, trailing flame kill number 5, but the enemy was relentless. A second fighter attacked from 5 o'clock. The tail gunner took over his twin guns, hammering for 6 seconds. The enemy plane disintegrated before anyone could breathe. The third fighter used the smoke to close to 400 yards. Another ramming attempt. The pilot did not maneuver, he just aimed his aircraft for seconds impact. The Japanese plane hit the left wing root of Ace, minus to the massive force, shoved the B-29 sideways as if slapped by a giant hand. The enemy plane shattered its debris, severing hydraulic lines and tearing the skin of the left wing. Kill number 6, if you can call being hit a kill. A-52 was now a flying wreck. The number 1 engine on the left took damage from the debris. Its propeller was chipped and the main fuel tank was ruptured, venting aviation gas. The plane felt like it had snapped in half. In reality, they were flying on only one fully functional engine, number 2. This 60-ton beast was struggling at 18,000 feet airspeed, dropping below 160 miles per hour, teetering on the edge of a stall. And 12 more Japanese fighters were regrouping for a third wave. The B-29 was no longer flying, it was drifting. The bleeding of fuel from the left wing was visible. 1 and 3 word ED4 was shut down. The lone number to right, our 335's Arrow engine, was screaming, carrying a load 4 times its design limit. But the radar blips lit up again. The third wave 12 key 44s circled above like vultures. This was not an interception anymore, it was an execution. 12:35 in the afternoon, the attack began. This time the Japanese abandoned complex tactics. They formed a line, attacking from 6 o'clock dead astern, one by one. A train of death. The first fighter entered range, 1,000 yards. Chen took the override from the blinded tail gunner. He did not need to see the pilot face, he just aimed at the flashing nose. Thump, 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 the quad 50s roared. Chen fell fused with the machine. The bullets found the radiator of the lead plane. White glycol steam erupted and the plane hit an invisible wall, veering right and tumbling into the clouds. Kill number 7 then, the second one. It tried to come up from the blind spot below. Chen anticipated the pull up and fired a short burst. Tracers punched the cockpit. Kill number 8. Chen ammo was running dry. Maybe 100 rounds left in the belt. 10 enemies remained, and then a miracle of physics occurred. The Japanese fighters, all at once, stopped their attack. They waggled their wings and turned northwest, not out of mercy, out of fuel. To catch the B-29, they had burned their afterburners for too long. If they did not turn back now, they would become gliders themselves. The sky went silent, but silence was not salvation. It was just the start of the torture. Now came the math. They were 1,500 miles from Saipan, one engine working, massive drag, fuel leaking by the gallon. Aircraft Commander Walter Wojtich looked at the gauges. His face was pale. Even if the engine did not blow, the fuel would run dry. Fuel would run dry 300 miles short of the runway. Ditching a B-29 in the ocean usually had a survival rate of less than 40%. Dump everything. The order crackled, everything except water and first aid kits. Over the Pacific, a strange scene unfolded. Machine guns, ammo boxes, flak jackets, even the top secret expensive Norden bomb sight, everything was ripped out and thrown through the bomb bay. Every pound shed bought them a few hundred yards hour after hour passed. The lone number to engine roared on cylinder head. Temperatures past the red line, oil pressure critically low, but it refused to quit. For in the afternoon they passed Iwo Jima, still in enemy hands. 6 in the evening, darkness fell inside. It was freezing. Robert Chen huddled in the corner, adrenaline gone, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion, but no one slept. They listened to the engine. Any hiccup meant death. 8 in the evening, a blip on the radar. Saipan land hull. But the celebration died in their throats. The number 2 engine, having carried them for 8 hours, finally gave up. With a violent cough, the propeller windmill led. They were 30 miles out, 4,000 feet. We lost it, the Cope Islet yelled. A-52 was now a 60-ton glider sliding silently toward the faint runway lights of his Eli Field no-go-around. No second-chance gear down, only the right main and nose gear locked. The left main gear was stuck the hydraulics, severed hours ago, ending with a symmetric gear was suicide. The plane would ground, loop, and explode, but they had no choice. Brace for impact. Chen closed his eyes. 8:15 in the evening, the right tire screeched against the coral runway, then the unsupported left wing slammed into the ground. Sparks lit up the night as the friction turned metal to magma. The plane swerved violently left, plowing off the runway like a runaway bull tearing through grass and dirt. With a heart-stopping crunch, it stopped silence, then the emergency hatches flew open. Chen and the crew stumbled out running for their lives before the fuel fumes ignited, but the explosion never came. When the jeeps arrived, the headlights revealed a ghost. A-52 was hardly a plane anymore. It was a sieve covered in hundreds of bullet holes. The left wing was severed, the tail shredded. Metal fragments from Japanese fighters were embedded in the fuselage. Intelligence counted 75 separate attacks. The final tally, confirmed by gun camera footage and cross-referencing 14 kills by ramming 12 by gunfire. This was the highest single sortie air combat score recorded for a B-29 Superfortress during the entirety of World War II. Robert Chen, the 22-year-old kid, had walked through hell and come out the other side. A-52 never flew again. It was eventually scrapped for parts to keep others flying, but the story of January 27th became an immortal legend. Years later, after the war had ended, someone asked Robert Chen if he was afraid during those terrifying moments in the sky. He paused for a moment and said, "In that moment, you do not have time to be afraid. You are basically just doing math in your head. It is just that in this specific classroom, if you calculate wrong, the price you pay is not a bad grade, it is your own life." That is the incredible story of A-52, to the bomber that refused to fall and the brave crew that refused to ever quit. If you enjoyed this legendary story of survival and want more hardcore history breakdown, smash that like button and subscribe now. I am your strategy observer, digging up the buried legends of the past, and I will see you on the next battlefield very soon.